So this afternoon, this morning, whenever you're listening to this, we are going to discuss Chapter 7 on photosynthesis. And in Chapter 6, we focused on breaking down glucose with oxygen, producing carbon dioxide and water as waste products. Now, photosynthesis, interestingly, basically takes the cellular respiration equation and reverses it. We're going to have plants taking in sunlight and carbon dioxide and producing glucose and oxygen. So the glucose produced by the plant, right, can be used in a bunch of different ways for its own cellular respiration, to create molecules of cellulose for its structure, to create starch when they produce too much, and other organic compounds. And organisms such as animals will then eat plants to get the starch and the sugar for energy. So plants use some of the glucose they make for their own food energy, and heterotrophs, animals and other things, will use the stored energy in plants for their own food. All right, so a plant is an autotroph, meaning it's a self-feeder. It will create its own glucose through photosynthesis and then break down that glucose with its mitochondria and cellular respiration. So animals, on the other hand, are heterotrophs. And heterotrophs are going to have to consume their own, are going to have to consume food. So photosynthesis is, again, a very similar reaction, but the reverse to cellular respiration. We have 6 carbon dioxides plus 12 waters leads to 1 molecule of glucose, 6 molecules of water, and 6 molecules of oxygen. Now, before we get into all of this, let's discuss the structure of a plant, right? We went over plant cells, and then when we did cellular respiration, we went over a little bit of structure of the mitochondria. All right, but now we're going to go over the structure of a leaf and then how and what the chloroplast is. So here on the top, we have a cross-section of a leaf, and most leaves are going to be 2 to 3 cell layers thick, right? They want the light to hit from both sides, so they're not very thick structures. Here you'll see the chloroplasts inside the leaf lined with the thylakoids, the green. On the bottom half of the leaf, or the inferior section, you see something called a stoma, and a stoma is going to be where the gas exchange happens. So there'll be carbon dioxide entering the stoma and oxygen leaving the stoma. Very similar to how gas exchange happens in the lungs, right? We have oxygen coming in and carbon dioxide going out. So the stoma is going to allow for gas exchange because, as you know, we need carbon dioxide to have the reactants for photosynthesis. So we have the leaf, it's called the mesophyll layer. In the mesophyll layer, we have the chloroplasts. You'll notice that the chloroplast is a double membrane structure, just like the mitochondria is. And within that inner membrane, in the stroma, is called something called the thylakoid. And a thylakoid is actually where the process of photosynthesis is going to take place. Very similar to the way mitochondria cellular respiration occurs in our mitochondria. We have chloroplasts housing the photosynthetic structure. So each energy converting organelle serves a purpose, right? Compartmentalization. So the chloroplast itself has stroma on the inside, similar to the mitochondrial matrix, has that thick fluid. And then the thylakoid membranes, right, is going to be the membrane across which the oxidative phosphorylation is going to take place, and we'll get to that in a minute. So when we talk about photosynthesis, similar to when we talked about cellular respiration, I encourage you to go to Pearson, go to the study area, and find the bioflicks on photosynthesis. Again, it's going to allow you to see the oxygen, see the carbon dioxide, see the ATP, the sunlight, etc. in a moving video. So I suggest going and finding that bioflicks before, during, and after. Watch it over and over and over again until it makes sense to you. So when we talk about the reactants of photosynthesis, we have carbon dioxide and water. And what we're going to create is glucose, more water, and oxygen. So the water that we end up with is not the water that we start out with. We split the carbon dioxide and we split the water. And in that case, we can see how the products are sort of combinations of both of those two reactants. So when we talked about cellular respiration, we spoke of it in 4 stages. We spoke about glycolysis, the pyruvate conversion, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. And if we talk about it in that direction, right, starting with glycolysis and heading toward oxidative phosphorylation, and we talk about the systematic breakdown of glucose from start to finish. In photosynthesis, if we're talking about a reaction that goes in the other direction from carbon dioxide and water giving rise to glucose and oxygen, right, the equation sort of turns around. Well, the steps in photosynthesis are very similar to the steps in cellular respiration, just in reverse. So for example, when oxidative phosphorylation went last in cellular respiration, it actually comes first in the process of photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis will basically have 2 main stages, and then sort of we'll talk about sort of the end point. Which could be sort of a reverse glycolysis, but we're going to talk about what's called the light reaction, and we're going to talk about the Calvin cycle. Now, when we first talked about light energy, it is a form of kinetic energy from the sun, and the light energy is going to be converted into the potential energy of ATP and then sugar. All right, so let's talk about this question first. So here we have carbon dioxide and water gives rise to glucose, water, and oxygen. So the organic carbon in a tree, like in the cellulose that makes up the tree, where does that come from? Does it come from the soil? Does it come from the water? Does it come from the air? Does it come from fertilizer? Or does it come from the light? All right, so where's the carbon coming from in that glucose? If you follow that pink arrow back to the reactant, it comes from carbon dioxide. And where are we getting the carbon dioxide from? Right, we're getting the carbon dioxide from the stoma. So it's coming from the air. All right, so the organic carbon in a tree comes primarily from air. And again, another picture of the mesophyll layer, the thylakoid, right, just another way to illustrate it. And here we are. So similar to when we saw the cellular respiration and we had the mitochondria, the image, this is a good image to keep in mind, a good image to be able to follow the flow of light and water and carbon dioxide, etc., through the process. We have the light reactions, which makes sense because that's where the sunlight converts the water into NADPH. NADPH is going to be an electron carrier, right? Similar to the NADH that we saw in cellular respiration. I like to say that P means photosynthesis. It doesn't, but NADPH is the photosynthetic electron carrier. All right, so when we talk about the light reactions, all right, we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to talk about the use of chlorophyll as a molecule, and those are the green pigments. So the light is going to come in, it's going to hit those green pigments, something's going to happen called the light reactions, which we'll go over in a minute, and then we're going to head over to the Calvin cycle. The water is split, as you can see, the H2O comes in, the O2 goes out the bottom, which means the hydrogens go to the right, right? They're on that NADPH, they're attached to it. Just the way the hydrogens were attached to the NADH when we were breaking down glucose. Here we're going to build up glucose. So if you can see, the Calvin cycle has carbon dioxide coming in from the top. We want to add hydrogen to that. And then at the bottom, you get a simple sugar, right? So we're breaking the water in half, oxygen gets released. We're going to carry those hydrogens over to carbon dioxide in the Calvin cycle and make sugar. Now, which experiment was going to produce heavy oxygen? So I guess we got to figure out, where's the oxygen coming from? Does the oxygen come from the water, or does the oxygen come from the carbon dioxide? Right, if you look at this picture, it's clear that the water goes in the top of the light reactions and oxygen comes out the bottom of the light reactions. So the water is where we're going to get the oxygen. So in this case, where are we getting O18? Experiment 1 has H2O18. Experiment 2 has H2O regular. So experiment 1 is going to give you the heavy oxygen because right here, the splitting of water is going to release this oxygen to the atmosphere. All right, now when we're talking about fueling and powering photosynthesis, right? The colors that are used, the pigments that absorb and are used to electrically or energetically split that water, are going to be the blue violet, blue orange, blue green, and a little bit of yellow orange. And so what you'll notice here is most of the green is not actually used, which is why the plants look green, right? The color of something is that light wavelength reflected into your eye, not the absorption of it. White is the reflection of all colors, and black is the absorption of all colors. And every other color is a perceptible wavelength hitting your eye. So you can see here, see all on the top, the absorption of the light by the chlorophyll pigments. We're absorbing, right? We're absorbing all of those purples and blues and a little bit of the oranges and reds, but the yellows and greens not absorbing, right? And so the action spectra, the rate of photosynthesis, is very high when we're exposed to purple and blue light and red and orange light, right? So the green is reflected, right? You can see by this image, and the absorbed light is absorbed. And that light energy is going to split the water molecules. So this is called a photosystem. And the light energy comes in, you'll see it bounces down the green pigments, and then it goes to the middle, and then you'll see how it sort of jumps up on that little arrow, that little electron. And so we end up with this same sort of look. We've seen something similar to this before, where we have ATP synthase across the membrane, we have an electron transport chain, we have oxidative phosphorylation. So this is the light reactions, right? The light reactions are the reactions that convert light energy to chemical energy, producing oxygen as a waste product. And there are three major steps that happen here. Number one, the light energy is going to be absorbed, and you can see that here. You can see it on the top left here. And what it's going to do is the light actually splits the water. See that at the bottom of that photosystem number 2, and you'll see the two little blue electrons heading into the middle of the photosystem. And remember, the transfer of hydrogens and the transfer of those electrons is going to result in the creation of ATP. So the light's absorbed, the electrons from water are excited, ATP and NADPH are formed, and we're using oxidative phosphorylation to do that. You'll notice how there are a whole bunch of hydrogens inside the thylakoid space. The high to low diffusion rate through ATP synthase, we're used to seeing that. So it goes from the thylakoid space down into the stroma, out of the thylakoid. And instead of oxygen being down here, we have NADP down here. Going right here. We're going to pick up these hydrogens and we're going to go to the Calvin cycle, and we're going to see what happens next. So since we have the hydrogens, we have the ATP. So now we've captured that light energy into the molecule of ATP. This is where that endergonic reaction happens. We captured that kinetic energy, and now we have the chemical energy of ATP. Now we want to take those hydrogens, take that ATP, and we're going to go to the next step, and we are going to create sugars in the Calvin cycle. So you'll see that in the top, the carbon dioxide comes in, and then we have the ATP and the hydrogens, or the NADPH, coming in, and we are systematically adding hydrogens to the carbon dioxide to get a sugar. All right, so the Calvin cycle, so the light reactions, right, is where we're going to split water. We're going to carry those hydrogens and those electrons to the Calvin cycle. At the Calvin cycle, it's going to be a cyclic series of reactions, right? We've seen a cycle before that broke down sugar. Here we're using the cycle to create sugar. So it's sort of the mirror image of the citric acid cycle. It occurs in the stroma. We are going to take carbon dioxide, right? Comes in through the stoma into the stroma. And then we're going to use the carbon dioxide, the energy from ATP, the electrons from NADPH, and we're going to make a molecule called G3P. Now, G3P, if you look at it, is a 3-carbon compound. It's very reminiscent of the pyruvate molecule that we saw in cellular respiration when we break down that 6-carbon sugar into 6-carbon glucose into 2 3-carbon pyruvates. Here we have a 3-carbon molecule. All we need to do is take a couple of those 3-carbon molecules, stick them together, right, in sort of a reverse glycolysis type procedure, and you'll notice at the bottom right here, we're going to get glucose and other compounds. So there are enzymes in this process that make the sugars, and we're going to end up with G3P, and that G3P can then go to make sugar, glucose, and other compounds. All right, so this is the overarching image. It's a great one to have around. It's a great one to really look at and understand, right? We have the water from the ground going up the tree. We have the carbon dioxide coming in from the air. We have the sunshine shining on the tree. The tree is going to give off oxygen. It's going to give off sugar. How that happens on the bottom right, the light comes in, the water comes in, the light reactions happen. We split that water. We capture the hydrogens and the energy. We get rid of the oxygen as a waste product. We carry those hydrogens over to the carbon dioxide in the Calvin cycle. We systematically add hydrogens using the ATP energy to the carbon dioxide, and we end up with G3P. The G3P can either be chained for starch storage or sucrose or sugar for export. This is a great image. Take a while, take a minute, look at it. Another summary, the light reactions carried out by molecules in the membrane. They convert the light energy to the chemical energy, right? Endergonic, we're capturing that kinetic energy of light. We split water, release oxygen. Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma. We're using the ATP and the NADPH to convert carbon dioxide to sugar by adding hydrogen to it. And everything else goes back to the light reactions to grab on to some more hydrogen from water, etc. All right, so this is, kind of a short chapter. A lot of what you heard about, right? You already knew the terminology, right? Electron carriers and oxidative phosphorylation and all of that kind of stuff. So I hope that you understand this. Again, go in and watch those bioflicks. It's a great addition to your study. Have a good day.